Hey guys, my name is Loveless, and this time we're back with Quirk Knife, all the way to episode 38, or chapter 38, whichever. So let's get straight into it. Izuku refused to answer any questions asked, and for several reasons after he woke up. 1, he didn't want to. 2, when he spoke, it felt like his throat would melt away. 3, he was stuttering again, like as if he regressed to the age of 4. I heard you speak, young man. Don't pretend you can't hear me now. Recovery Girl scolded gently as she was cleaning some of his wounds that had split open, mainly the ones on his torso, since 3 of his 4 limbs were still in large heavy casts, meaning he couldn't even make a run for it. As he's been doing the past several minutes, Izuku continued to stare at a large random dot on the ceiling with heavy eyes, ignoring the blonde man that wouldn't move away from his face. Could you hear me while you were dead? Hawks asked, earning a sharp smack from Recovery Girl, followed by, he was comatose, not dead. Izuku couldn't really make sense of anything. He remembered dreaming of a room with 2 doors in which there were people, yet who he couldn't recall. Was Kachan there at one point? And a river? Something with sharp teeth. And did he speak to his mother? Or was he seriously just delusional? Midoriya, Hawk sang again. Are you still in a coma? Oh my god, this man is annoying as fuck. Hawks, please. Midoriya is likely both physically, emotionally, and mentally exhausted. Give him some room, the healing hero sighed. And Midoriya, I cannot use my quirk on you any further. It could kill you. I couldn't use it on you while you were unconscious since your body was already extremely low on energy. So we'll have to let a couple days pass before another session. Is that understood? Izuku still didn't respond. Maybe he's gone deaf, Hawks pointed out. No, I've checked his ear canals and internal functions. He can hear us just fine. He simply decided to be stubborn. Still with the emotionless expression, Izuku stared up and could see the sun going down from his peripheral vision, painting the sky in faded and blended colors. He felt oddly calm for someone who was apparently in a severe coma. And despite all the rest, he felt really tired. Maybe he could just shut his eyes for a few moments and... Izuku! The door slammed open to reveal 5 very disheveled people, all trying to squeak past the door, several missing shoes, and 1 shirt. Hitoshi was the first to get through the doorway. Izuku noting the smell of ketchup, and nearly threw Hawks out the way, his eyes rimmed dark, red in a still watery way. You big asshole, he screamed, although his words had no bite to him, placing both hands gently on either side of Izuku's face, with a trembling chin. Toga and Dabi were next, Recovery Girl having stopped Toga from jumping on him, so the blonde took to kneeling in a chair and resting her hands in Izuku's hair while crying. Hey kid, Hazashi leaned over Dabi's shoulder, Hitoshi moving over and allowing both older men to get closer to the bed. Without hesitation, the lanky blonde leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to Izuku's temple. Thank God you're okay. We were all so... Ah! Why are you crying? Slow, hot tears dripped down the sides of Izuku's face, tracing his jaw before falling down onto the pillow supporting his head. Some caught onto the oxygen mask and the strange tube connected to his neck. Without even trying to speak, Izuku knew why he was crying. It was strange and unfamiliar to see all these people so worried about his well-being. He never really experienced this kind of thing before. He's most likely overwhelmed, Dabi spoke softly. Try to be calm, guys. Shota hummed and wiped the tears from Izuku's face with a feather-light touch, his eyes soft despite the dark bags under his eyes. His stress was visible. I texted May, Hitoshi mumbled. She should be here soon. I couldn't decode her keyboard smash, but I think she's on her way. Recovery Girl forcing them to back up as she got back to removing certain tubes, adding some in certain places, and switching to specific objects. Izuku couldn't really care to watch her movements. I'm gonna have to take your oxygen mask off, okay? Your lungs seem capable of functioning on their own, despite your previously broken ribs and internal bleeding. But you have to notify me immediately if you find breathing difficult. The woman explained slowly, and as she did that, removing the mask from Izuku's face and pausing for a moment, watching the heart monitor. Okay, she hummed to herself in a satisfied note. I'm taking your blood test now to the lab. No one do anything stupid. Dabi helped Izuku take small sips of water for a few moments before the greenette slightly pushed the cup away, coughing and tonguing the cuts on his chapped lips, anxious under all the stares. Can you speak? Toga frowned slightly. You haven't said anything. Izuku didn't respond at first, staring down at his bandages before looking back at Hawks. The blonde startled. He said a sentence, but I think it was a little hard for him. His throat possibly hurts. So he had a super long tube in there. Izuku didn't really listen to the growing conversation, his eyes instead glued to Dabi's strange expression, his shoulders pulled to his ears and eyes wide, hands clutching his knees. Izuku made a humming noise, far too quietly for anyone to hear except for Dabi. The man's ice eyes flickered up to him. Izuku then widened his eyes slightly, flicking them down to Dabi's hands, then back up, hoping he was conveying his question across. Ever since they met, the two have been good at reading one another's body language, and it's only gotten stronger with time, as Dabi obviously understood, tilting his head slightly to Hawks. Izuku eyed the hero in question, not quite understanding what his friend was getting at. Maybe he didn't like Hawks. The hero was working with Endeavor quite a few times, so that could explain why he felt defensive in his presence. I guess we should take the time to catch you up on everything. Shota sighed as he sat down, Hawks awkwardly showing himself out while the others also looked to take a seat. Izuku continued to stare at the ceiling as Shota explained on what was going on and what the plan was, but he found it hard to pay attention while his brain was feeling fuzzy. Yet he did the best nonetheless. Hawks made several laps around the hospital halls. With dazed eyes, ignoring the concerned doctors that kept trying to ask him if he was okay. The heel of his boots were dragging heavily as he made a third lap, only slamming into someone who was coming around the hospital corner. Oh, shit! Sorry, Hawks rubbed the back of his head and looking up slowly. The familiar shirtless man hastily turned away from him and covering the back of his hair with his hands very unsuccessfully, a tuft of white, gray, and red strands, and black strands spilling over. Nah, I should have been paying attention. Hawks heard himself mumble quietly, although he didn't feel very present. His mind was too busy staring at the thick, faded scar on the small of the man's back, just below some of his staples, pinching his skin together, several missing, creating an uneven pattern. You got a scar there? Hawks said softly as the man scoffed it sarcastically. Really? I had no fucking idea. The blonde ignored the quipped response and removed one of his gloves without thinking, reaching to press his index finger against a specific scar that he found mesmerizing, watching his muscles ripple in shock under his touch. It looked exactly like the one he'd given someone before by accident, a long time ago. The man, Dabi, was it? Dabi jerked forward immediately, Hawks letting a hand slip limp back to his lap, a strange and uncomfortable pressure building up behind his eyes. You got a scar there, he repeated slowly, but a little louder this time, struggling to his feet and taking a step forward. Remember? Hawks ducked his head. You called me Tweety Bird, remember that? Stop that! Hawks looked over to his textbook sprawling on his bed and rolled over, looking at his roommate with a confused expression. What'd I do this time? The red-haired boy glared at him with a tired stare, arms crossed and leaning against the wall behind his own bed. You know what you did. You were doing it on purpose. Hawks frowned deeply as his bushy eyebrows pinched together in frustration, looking around to see what he did. There was a few feathers askew that he accidentally left around, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. Hawks's new roommate was strange. The most random things ticked him off, such as the time Hawks didn't hang up his shower towel on the hook and instead hung it on the door, or the time when Hawks didn't put his training shoes straight against the closet door and they were too far out. So that's exactly what he looked for. Getting up from his bed, checking his shoes, they were in the right place, towel in the right place, toothbrush in the right place. Everything was in the right place. Hawks frowned and stood in the middle of the room with his hands balled into tiny fists on his hips, turning his head in a circle several times before he sighed. I don't know. Why are you so upset? His friend's face wasn't pinched anymore. His expression had become slack and somewhat guilty. Wait, you seriously don't know? No, of course not. I wouldn't upset you on purpose. The boy with blue eyes suddenly broke into a soft laughter, and Hawks' shoulder went slack. That was the first time he heard him laugh. It was really pretty. Aw, man, this is gold. Wildfire. Wildfire gasped between breaths. Hawks, are you serious? What? Is there something on my face? Wildfire took his head and pulled his knees to his chest, balancing the book on his thighs and hiding his face once again, saying something that Hawks missed. He heard something, just not clearly. Hawks leaped onto Wildfire's bed and sat onto the boy's feet, knocking his book away and resting his chin on both his knees. What you say? Wildfire's eyes widened, and Hawks leaned into his personal space and turned his face to the side. I said nothing. You totally said something. I heard you. Wildfire pushed his entire face back with one hand, and Hawks slumped onto the mattress, rolling over and staring at his friend. Tell me what I was doing. You were making, noises, okay? What noises? I don't mutter. You were chirping and whistling. I thought you were doing it to piss me off. Hawk's face felt hot suddenly as he laughed anxiously, quickly getting up off the bed and returning to his own. Sorry, I didn't notice. He paused and continued quietly. The adults don't like it either. I try to stop now. Hawks went back to his book lying on his stomach and forcing away from Wildfire before the mattress bent down slightly, a book coming down next to his own. Wildfire laying in the same way to be shoulder to shoulder and returned to his reading without saying anything for several minutes, until he broke the silence. I don't mind the sound. It's kind of nice, I guess. Hawks tilted his head over. It's nice? Pretty. It sounded like the birds outside in the early morning. Did you just call my chirping pretty? Shut up, Tweety Bird. Ugh, Tweety Bird. Yeah, that's you, Tweety Bird. And maybe Hawks was okay with that. The man was still until he lowered his hands over so slightly. So, yeah, just a dumb nickname or whatever. Hawks looked down at his shoes, trying to figure out why his face felt hot. But then something wet hit his face. He frowned further and looked up to see there's a leak in the ceiling, only to find out the water increasing, and it wasn't coming down from above. It was coming from his eyes. Hawk sniffled heavily and kept trying to wipe his tears away with a flat expression, but it wouldn't stop falling. Why wouldn't it stop falling? Are you crying? The blonde looked back to the scarred and sniffled. No, I don't cry. Sounds like you're crying. I'm not. But you are. Why are you crying? Huck sighed and leaned against the wall, sliding down until he sat in a crouched position, watching the man lean against the wall as well, with his face tilted to the other side, not clearly visible. You'd think I'm crazy if I tell you. Hawks chuckled sadly, tugging onto the fluff of his jacket. I already think you're crazy, touching my back and shit. Fair point. The blonde hugged his knee gently. You just remind me of someone that I lost. That's all. You lost? Dobby sounded vaguely interested now, shifting his weight from foot to foot, in which Hawks was now noticing that he was barefoot. Did they die? I don't know, Hawks admitted. He kinda just left me, without saying goodbye. I tried to ask his family about him, but they kept brushing me away and ignoring me. I think he passed away. They have a shrine of him in his home. They let me visit it once, but that's it. I don't understand. I get mad about it sometimes. Dobby shifted some more. Why mad? It's not the dude's fault if he literally died. Hawks chuckled. I'm not mad because of that. I'm just mad that he left. But I guess I don't blame him one bit. But just, I'd wish I'd gone with him. Gone with him to fucking die? The blonde sniffled at the realization of what he just had said. But there's no point in denying something that was true. Yes, I would have gone anywhere if it meant staying with him. Why? Hawk shrugged, and he felt Dobby's eyes on him, clinging on to every word. I don't know, just would have. There's nothing really behind it. I was happy around him. That's all there is. You're fucking batshit crazy. So dramatic. You're acting like you haven't been happy since. You're a top hero, for God's sake. Nothing really to complain about, right? Hawks bit on his bottom lip slightly and looked to the side. Right. Yeah. Right. I'm a hero. So... Suddenly there was a gentle hand in his hair, dull fingers scratching over his scalp lightly. Sorry to hear about your friend then, Birdie. There's a pause. What reminds me of your friend anyway? It's hard to explain, Hawk said softly, but I don't know. I feel around you. Feel what? Feel. The hand stopped still in his hair, and Hawks found himself inching up and reaching for the touch as Dobby sighed. You haven't been around me for much time, idiot. Well, your friend probably feels like shit for leaving you behind at that shithole then. Hawks' eyes snapped up and finally caught a good look of yellow eyes locking onto blue. What shithole? The commission. Oh, fuck me. The warm hand left Hawks' hair, and the man quickly turned to flee. But Hawks was faster, and he literally threw himself forward, slamming into the other and bringing them both down to the ground. Get off me, you're heavy! He gasped as the two coughed and squirmed. Hawks slipping his hands on the other side of the mysterious face. Why didn't he realize it sooner? What did he say? What does anyone say in a position like this? Hawks found tears coming out thicker as he spewed out the only thing he could form, his entire body shaking, his stomach feeling sick. Please don't leave me, Toya.
So you'd be in my class, you're intelligent and more than capable in the physical department, so you'd have no trouble catching up. We're not even 2 weeks in anyways. Shota finished. Izuku stared at him with large eyes as Recovery Girl worked the cast off his leg, replacing it with a more tender bandage while checking the flesh and bone. Now that that's out the way, Shota drew in a deep breath. Don't you ever do any fucking shit like that again. Never, ever, ever. You do not put your life on the line for me. Is that understood? You're lucky that you're hospitalized, or else I'll beat your ass right here, right now. Izuku's eyes went even wider as he found anger build up suddenly. He never saw Shota as someone that could be selfish. Well, everyone's selfish from time to time. It happens. But that doesn't mean Izuku's any less pissed. His jaw fell open and closed a few times as Mei offered him water. Her eyes were still bloodshot as Izuku shook his head. Tears welled up in his eyes as he spat as clearly as he could. Selfish? The room went silent as Shota sighed. Izuku, I'm really pissed, but you weren't exactly selfish. You. Shota's expression was unclear as he stared at Izuku, who simply stared back without wavering. I was selfish? The man slowly asked. I don't understand. If you die, what about me? You, mine, and not just your life. Kids. He's right, Toga whispered. If we just sat back and watched you die, how would you expect us to keep living? I don't think I could. And they save lives, Hitoshi added. I don't want to think about the classmates I could have lost, not to mention my own life. You're strong, Aizawa, but not strong enough to stop a fucking slaughter by masked villains. It was clear Shota wanted to argue, yet was obviously struggling to find a valid argument. But Izuku, you have to understand where I'm coming from. I'm responsible for your current state right now. It's my fault. You could have died. You did die. And how do you think No. You're in my care, Izuku. You're my kid, and I failed you. Izuku's bottom lip began to tremble again, except he must have cried himself dry because there was no tears left to fall. No, he groaned, and dragged the word out until his vocal cords gave out. Izuku got stuck on the same sound for several long seconds, then giving up completely and falling silent. He should make a recovery. Recovery girl interrupted awkwardly. At least the wounds I have already assessed. His arms were worst along his ribs and internal bleeding. I had to surgically remove the bones and manually put them back in the right place, and even remove some fragments. The bones were completely shattered. Shota leaned back and rubbed his eyes. I should have been better. Shota, you need to stop. The older woman sighed. You did everything you possibly could have done. You put your life on the line. That's the most you can do. Everyone's alive now, so stop beating yourself up about it, okay? Please, that won't help anyone. Izuku made a noise of agreement. You hero. Shota ducked his head down until it was leaning on Izuku's thigh. I'm so sorry, Izuku. Stop that. Izuku grunted, knocking Shota on the top of his head with his cast. Recovery girl smiled. Well, he should be good to go home in 46 hours. You'll have to return for weekly checkups, or you can find me at UA. His arm will be in a cast for another week, and we'll go from there. Thank you so much, Recovery Girl. Hitoshi smiled. It means a lot that you spent so much time to keep this idiot with us. Of course. And you all take care of yourselves, alright? Yamada over there fell asleep hours ago and hasn't stirred. Check for a pulse. The kids laughed quietly as Izuku looked down at his free leg. He rolled his ankle lightly to find the pain bearable. And no physical activity, young man, Recovery Girl called from the door. Be good. Izuku hummed and kicked his leg. Everyone okay? Yeah. Shota comforted. Don't worry, it's just you, brat. Izuku felt a small portion of his anxiety dissipate from that information, trying to ignore Mei oddly pawing through his hair, tongue caught in between her teeth as she focused on picking the knots apart without tugging, freezing suddenly. Izuku, I didn't know you dyed your hair. I thought the green was natural. Izuku's eyebrows furrowed together as his eyes flicked over to Mei. No dye. The pink-haired girl looked at the others as well and suddenly leaning over his head, face pressed together to see. Toga tilted her head. If that's your natural color, then what's that? I don't know what you're talking about. Lies, obviously. Toya fucked up. Toya fucked up. Toya fucked up. He wasn't ready to actually expose himself. How in the ever-loving fuck was he supposed to explain this? Hey man, my asshole dad beat the shit out of me a few years after pulling me from the commission and kicked me out the house, threatening my mother and like low-key faking my death. No hard feelings though. Keigo's shoulders were trembling violently as he refused to even blink, those sharp yellow eyes cutting into Toya's flesh. What would he say? It's you, right? Keigo whispered. Please don't lie to me. I can't do this again. Do what again? Toya responded out of instinct, only to cause Keigo to cling to his arm tighter. Don't leave me again. I can't. Please, Keigo began to pant, and Toya frowned. Oi, what the fuck are you? Keigo was trembling so violently that loose feathers around the ground began to visibly vibrate, his face slowly going red from lack of oxygen. Why wasn't he breathing? No, Toya wasn't being stupid. He remembers when this happens to Keigo as a kid. Instead of having a panic attack and hyperventilating like most people, this fucker just straight up stopped breathing. He might as well be choking. Oh fuck, Toya swore, hesitatively wrapping his arms around Keigo's torso and squeezing tightly, reaching up inside his coat by his back, his hands finding a specific spot from muscle memory. It was along the spine and between his wings, just slightly higher. Toya found the spot and scratched lightly, his eyes on the ceiling as he focused on the task at hand. Explaining a dead hero would be pretty difficult. Come on, Toya grunted as he used his other hand to rub Keigo's scalp again. Breathe, you idiot! Just breathe like me! Feel my chest. Watch me. Come on. Just as Keigo's body began to fall into unconsciousness, the man sucked a heavy breath as the panting returned, followed with some sputtering and coughing. You okay? Toya smoothed, giving it aggravated glares at the nurses who tried to approach them, forcing them to back off. I knew it! I knew! Keigo whispered. Were you not? I don't... Please, not right now, Toya begged softly. Soon. Nezu's helping me right now, and it'll all work out. Just, I know you've waited a long time, but you can wait a little longer. The hesitativeness was clear in Keigo's posture as his face stilled on Toya's shoulder, hands limp on the floor. Toya tried again. Do you trust me? There was absolutely no hesitation this time. Yes. I'm not leaving, the taller man explained slowly and firmly. I will not leave, understand? Yes. Good. Good. It won't be long. I missed you. Toya felt silent, not sure how to respond to Keigo repeating it, more to himself to make things real. I missed you. Toya's grip tightened in the blonde's hair. I'm sorry. It's okay. I missed you. Why am I crying? I don't know. The tone of Keigo's voice was so off-putting. There was no longer a familiar chip and excitement. It was like the life was sucked out of him. Toya felt the exact same way. I don't cry. Okay. Yeah, no crying. Blonde man jerked up at his name and thinning his eyes, tilting his head like he didn't understand. What? Keigo, that's you. I'm Hawks. Toya retracted his hand and leaned back ever so slightly, a deadpan expression on Keigo's face, sending chills down his spine. Well, yeah, but you're also Keigo. My name is Hawks. I don't know what you're saying. The blonde stood in a robotic motion, and Toya followed, eyebrows pinched as he stared at his old friend, someone he was currently struggling to recognize. You don't look so good, Toya asked quietly, now realizing how bony Keigo felt under his touch. Every knob of his spine he could feel from his fingertips, if anything. Toya was seeing Izuku in Keigo right now, especially when Izuku's health began to deteriorate. Was that happening to Keigo as well? You must be cold. Keigo smiled strangely as he removed his jacket, wrapping it around Toya's shoulders, and self-consciously stuffing his hands into his pockets, shoulders hunched up to his ears. I don't get cold, you know that. Keigo blinked and nodded. Right, but keep this just in case, because I'll be expecting you to give that back soon. because you're not leaving or anything, right? Uh, oh, okay. I promise. Toya whispered with his head down, and Keiko sighed, taking a few strides forward and stopping once shoulder to shoulder with Toya. I'm still with the commission, by the way. Toya continued to stare forward with wide eyes as he listened to the heels of Keiko's boots fade away, his goosebumps growing stronger. Was that a cry for help or some shit? Shota ended up allowing the kids to hang around Izuku for the next few days. Even though he wasn't happy about Shinto and Hatume missing school, the nurse stuck around the problem children, which consist of mainly group naps mushed on one cot despite all of them being offered separate beds to sleep on. This 2-day break allowed both Shota and Hizashi to panic, trying to scrap everything together. Several hours spent for housing around their prefecture and even going for a few tours. Honestly, Shota was so tired that the minute he found a 5-bedroom house, he slapped down payment. All energy drained, not only Izuku's paperwork, but trying to control the aftermath of USJ. He was just so tired, that's all. Hizashi sighed from behind the wheel and shot a small glance over. You got some clothing for him? Yep. Good. You're nervous, aren't you? No. Liar. Shota groaned heavily and pressed his head back to the car seat. How did we end up with a bunch of kids so fast? Luck? Ugh. Hizashi laughed weakly as he pulled into a reserved spot in the parking lot. The two greeted by familiar nurses on the way to Izuku's room. They entered without knocking to find Toya sitting on the chair holding his phone, Hatume next to him and pressed into his side, each with an earbud in their ears and seeming to watch some sort of movie. Toya was sitting against the wall on the bed, and Izuku back facing her, braiding his hair carefully as the greenette was half asleep, out cold at the foot of the bed and somehow missing a shoe. Why was his children always missing articles of clothing? Shota! Hizashi! Toga beamed with excitement as she tied up one of Izuku's French braids. Look, my ankle's all better. That's good to hear. Hizashi smiled as he took a seat, waving to a nurse that was just finishing up Izuku's last exam. So, once again, the nurse spoke kindly, Midoriya's state is still fragile. He can eat, breathe, and walk on his own. But obviously he currently has no use of his hands or arms, nor should he try to use them. No extreme physical activity and tons of rest. Make sure he takes his daily medication. There is an instruction book here. Shota accepted the pages and flicked through them. The long list of medications he'd never seen before, making him feel uneasy. When Midoriya is up to it, I strongly recommend a mental exam. Same goes for the other two here. Although, well, the nurse lowered his voice. We do have several concerns for Midoriya's mental state. He's clearly unstable, so be aware of that. In fact, I think we should step outside for a moment. Hizashi frowned slightly as he nodded, Shota following as an anxious pit in his stomach continued to grow. The nurse shut the door and sighed heavily. It was large debate whether or not Midoriya was actually fit to go home. Many of our professionals argue that he should be isolated in a mental institution for healing, but we decided against that. Separating from those he clearly cares about could easily throw him off course, and we're not willing to risk that. Izuku laughed softly from inside the room, as Shinso swore a few times. Toga then chuckled as well. The nurse continued. He hasn't spoken much, but we're very concerned about his mental state. I recommend you do not leave him alone, and when he takes his medication, check that he actually took it. Several times he tried to spit them out when no one was looking or tried to hide them under his tongue. Although we're not too sure why, we don't want him to harm himself. Shota frowned. You think he would harm himself? The nurse paused with hesitation. I didn't see it personally, but Recovery Girl along with our head doctor informed us of the scars on his body, several of which being older. It's not too sure what caused the marks, but it was very obvious self-inflicted. So, please, just keep a special eye on him. We will. Hisashi said immediately. He'll be alright. And keep all those kids together. They're happy that way. The nurse finished. That's everything. Midori is ready to leave, and please ensure you file the paperwork within 24 hours and check out at our front desk. Thank you, Shota mumbled as the nurse gave one last smile before moving on to his next patient, Shota biting his bottom lip. It'll be okay. Hisashi ran a hand gently through his dark hair before turning his head and planting his lips on the tip of his nose. Izuku forced a weak smile. Shota forced a weak smile before re-entering the room, only to find Izuku's head stuck folding over his shirt where Toga and Shinto were trying to help him change, yet got stuck in the bulky arm cask. For God's sake. Shota groaned as he pushed the two knuckleheads away, carefully working the sleeve out of his cast and freeing Izuku, his shoulders still heavily bandaged from where Izuku caught him. The same with his neck. There were fresh stitches through his chest, and another across his ribs. Shota now noticing all the scars that decorated his pale body, both new and old, all different shapes and sizes. There were so fucking many. Stop staring, will ya? Izuku stuttered with a red face. Hoodie, please. Shota shook his head slightly and collected the red hoodie he picked up from the store from their apartment, only now noticing his size guess was way off. He helped the small kid carefully, happy that he was able to fit the cast and the arm sleeves, although the rest hung large, dwarfing Izuku even further. The sweatpants were easier as Izuku stood and bent his knees several times, testing the strength as his legs wobbled slightly. I'm good. Good. Shota could tell that Izuku was growing more and more frustrated every time he spoke. No one dared to say anything about his stuttering. Shota assumed perhaps he was just tired, but his speech still hasn't improved, and Recovery Girl told him not to worry about it. Alright, listeners, Hisashi beamed. Let's head home. Hatsume, you're more than welcome to come over for dinner, of course. I told you, it's May, and heck yeah, I'm coming over. Toya, and I started a new show, and we're almost done. Shota sighed. How many episodes did you watch? Over the last 2 days? Like, only 3.5 seasons. Toya cringed and stood while cracking his back, shaking his legs out as Hatsume bounded at his side, talking rapidly about their little show. Toya contributing with small sounds and head nods. Home time, Toga sang as she held one of Shinto's arms. The other balled carefully in Izuku's sweater, who was walking very slowly. Their trip down to the parking lot, which took longer than it should have, mainly causing everyone to match Izuku's slow pace and his refusal to be carried. Bye-bye. Toga waved to every single person she passed, causing others around them to chuckle lightheartedly. Oh, fuck. Hisashi breathed as they reached their car. Show? 5 kids? 3 seats? Oh. Yeah. Shota waved his hand around lazily while the kids stared at him with waiting eyes, obviously awaiting further instructions. Just stack 'em up. Hisashi squawked loudly. Show! They're not plastic cups. I don't care. I want to go home. So stack 'em up. Toya was the first that shrugged as he climbed into the car in his usual seat, scooping Izuku like he was a cat and wrapping a seatbelt around the two of them without any struggle. Instead of the other 3 stacking, Hatsume and Toga were slightly pressed together, and Shinto was squashed between the window, complaining to himself under his breath. Toga, Hatsume, and Hisashi carried the conversation the entire way back to the apartment, walking through the doorway only to pause as Nemuri looked up behind several boxes and waved. Hey kids, what's up? Izuku felt useless the next week as teachers and heroes took turns staying at Shota and Hisashi's apartment with him. Toga and Toya spending most of that day packing up boxes and putting them in their car and moving to a new destination. Of course, Izuku couldn't help at all, spending his entire day balled up in Hitoshi's room, only seeing someone come and go to force medication down his throat. packing some of the items or making sure that he stayed still. Well, there. Eat, Mirako scolded. She was by far the scariest hero Izuku ever met. The muscle shirt she was wearing was making her biceps all the more intimidating. No. He spat back as the woman dangled a poorly made sandwich in front of his face, red eyes and frustrated with the lack of patience. I made it myself, fucker. Trying to say I can't cook? On what planet is that cooking? This planet, you little ass crack. Eat the sandwich I made for you. I know you skipped breakfast as well. Not hungry. Mirako screams loudly as Toya scrambled in. Why are you announcing your argument to the entire apartment complex? I know we're moving, but we don't need complaints from the other assholes around this place. The child isn't eating, Mirako huffed back. I can literally hear his stomach growling. Do something, Dabi. Toya thinned his eyes and placed his hands on his hips, bending down to meet Izuku's face. Oi, you haven't been eating all week. You also almost bit Toshi's hand off when he shoved the bread down your mouth. So what's the problem here? Don't you want to heal? Izuku frowned. Obviously. Stupid arms. So you need energy, right? So eat. Izuku wasn't sure why he didn't want to eat, but the thought of food was making his stomach turn. People catering to him made him feel weak and useless, which he didn't want to be. If he let that happen, then the kids in middle school would have been right all along. He needs to heal. Izuku opened his mouth slowly, and Mirako didn't hesitate in shoving a bite-sized piece in, retracting her hand quickly before she can lose a finger. Izuku suspected his biting habits had begun to become common knowledge. It continued like that until half of the sandwich was gone, and Izuku refused to eat any further, waving his stupid arms around to get rid of everyone. Mirako sighed and pulled her white hair up into a bun between her ears. Right. So tomorrow Hawks will come and pick you idiots up and bring you down. Right. So tomorrow Hawks will come and pick you idiots up and bring you all down. Nezu wants to see you all. He won't be here until lunch. So that gives you time to pack up any extra shit before the weekend. Toya stiffened visibly, and Izuku knew why. The man had explained everything on their first night home. Izuku, now aware of who his singular childhood friend was. There weren't many details shared, but enough to know that Toya was worried about Hawks, even though in Izuku's eyes it should be the other way around. Shit's probably gonna get real tomorrow, Mirako mumbled. Toga leaned in the doorway with a pinched expression, the woman counting. The woman continued. Nezu's smart. Scary smart. And he's taken an interest in you lot. Maybe, Toga said softly, but he's also doing everything in his power to help us. Nezu helps those who's been hurt. Who are being hurt. Mirako's eyebrows slowly sloped together as her lips parted. He's helping just because he wants to. I guess. Izuku watched the pro-hero with curiosity as her eyes flicked around the room in thought. Bottom lip caught in between her teeth before nodding. Yeah, I guess he's a hero and all. Helping people who need it is what we do. Mirako spoke distantly, as if she was trying to convince herself of something before pulling her phone out. I've got some stuff to do, and I'll be in the kitchen if you need me. Toga had to roll out of the way as the woman nearly ran out of the door, thumb slamming onto the screen of her phone violently fast. Izuku stared out of the window before sitting up slowly. He wanted to be a hero, too. He wanted to help those in need. Oh my goodness, that took forever. Jesus. And even though that my schedule is kind of fucked up, if you want to see more of this, you know what to do.